the What I Meant to Say podcast. I'm your host, Wendy Jones, founder of Be Better Media and a mom of 4, passionate about human connection. Throughout my journey, I have experienced many What I Meant to Say moments, but since life doesn't give us do-overs, I've created a space to reflect and tell our stories again with a little more grace for ourselves and the hope that we can help others and be better for having listened. Okay, this guy's awesome. This week I talked with Kurt Varricchio, husband, father, Major League Baseball agent, owner of KVA Sports, and author of his book, Behind in the Count, My Journey from Juvenile Delinquent to Baseball Agent. You'll love his resilient story from his early life struggles to becoming a dedicated family man, attorney, and the owner of a thriving sports agency that represents not only baseball players, but beach volleyball athletes too. I am so excited to be here today with Kurt Varricchio. Did I say that right?
Yeah.
All right.
Close enough.
And his book, Behind the Count, My Journey from Juvenile Delinquent to Baseball Agent. And gosh, I enjoyed this book a lot. Even though as a mother it completely broke my heart. But you captured a story that's really, really powerful. And so I'm really excited to have you here today to talk about it and where it's led. So thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. And thanks for reading the book.
Yeah, it's excellent. You're a really good writer. So it's something I value, but I love stories, and I really believe in the power of storytelling to heal and help people learn. And I think those are the two things we get when people are brave enough to tell their stories. So that's a really big driving force behind what I'm doing with my podcast and what I believe helps us be better. And so when I connected with Richard Hiskey, who works for you at KVA Sports, you guys were doing a lot of beach volleyball stuff, so that's how I connected with you. And the more Richard and I talked, and he's like, oh, you've got to meet Kurt. And then he sent me your book, and I understood this resilience story is right up my alley. So let's get right into it. Can you give me a take on your early life and where you've come from, the roots of where you start in this book?
So yeah, I mean the book starts obviously when I was a child. So I think the biggest issue for us growing up was when my father passed away. He was an older gentleman, significantly older than my mother, second or third marriage. But he passed away, and I was just under 2 years old, and I was the fourth of the 4 boys. So I was the youngest. So my mother was not equipped to handle us, and I think it's just over time things started setting in. Eventually, after being physically abused, emotionally abused, and everything by my brothers, I decided to run away from home and living on the streets. And then, one thing led to another, and living on the streets trying to survive, you try to do what you got to do, and that usually led to some criminal activity and in getting arrested and going in and out of juvenile hall and group homes and foster care system in the state of Florida. And I think that's kind of I talk about a lot of stories in there. That's pretty much the gist of it. That's when we started, and then from there he just talks about just being resilient and just really trying to continue to press forward and not be like the people that we hung out with. I didn't want to be in that lifestyle the rest of my life, so that's kind of how I started pulling myself out of the pit.
Yeah. And how old were you the first time you were sent to juvenile hall?
I was 8 years old when I started committing crimes and got caught, and then I believe the first time was 9. I was 9 years old when I went to juvenile hall. And the funny thing about that is I would always get in trouble with the law since, like I said, 7, 8 years old. The police officers would always just take me home and give me to my mother, and she'd roll her eyes, bring me in the house, and punish me for a day in a room or something, nothing too serious. And she thought it was effective. But when the officers that one time, we were pulling out of the Hollywood Police Department, and I was to the left and they pulled to the right, and I said, hey, my house is that way, where are we going? He said, well, we're going to go to juvenile hall this time. And that thing just hit me like a ton of bricks, because I was like scared, anxiety ridden. I mean, I was 9 years old going to juvenile hall, and which was unheard of for somebody that young. But I think the authorities had enough of my antics and who wanted to try to prove a point, which they did. Unfortunately, that only lasted for a couple of months, and I was right back at it.
Yeah. I noticed, though, reading your book, that so many of those stories, they really came from trying to survive. It's not like any kid is born with this inclination to do bad things, right, to break laws. but when you're put in this pure survival mode, that really came through in your story, that runner's instinct, that like, I just gotta get out of here. And what also just amazed me was like, you seem to have such a sharp memory for things that were so traumatic going on at that age in your life. Like, do you attribute that to anything, or did writing the book help stir those up, or have you always remembered these stories?
It's kind of a combination, because when bad things happen to people, it kind of burns into their mind, and there's only so many things you can look back and go, I remember specifically this. I can remember the smell of this, the taste of this, or whatever. And some of these stories were so dramatic that I was like, yeah, I specifically remember what happened. And then in writing it, things started coming about and go, oh yeah, I remember this. Or I would talk to my brother Steve, he's like my best friend, my closest brother, and he would say, hey, you remember this? And I was like, yeah, kind of. But he's like, well, here's what happened. And we would talk about it. I'm like, okay, now that makes sense. So, it was helpful talking with him on certain stories and stuff. But really, it was like, it's such a dramatic impact that you just can't forget it, And one thing I wanted to be careful of was if I wasn't 100% sure, I didn't put the story in, or if I didn't put the facts in. When I was speaking with publishers about publishing the book, some of them wanted to add some stuff or embellish, and I have a hard enough time remembering stuff now.
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine if I started making stories up. So it was important for me to get it right, and those were really things that I just remembered and situations.
Yeah. Well, there's some heavy ones in there, and like even the that structure of community that came out in juvenile hall, and some of the things that things that you would never picture, that you realize, wow, there are, no matter where you are, there's a community and a society going on.
Yes,
and the way that the way I read, I have a story, I can picture things, and that's why I enjoy reading so much. But picturing that, the age of these kids, and what the structure of society that went on within that, and then the guards, and just it being leadership and a community, and that concept of that, and the things that you learned how to fit in. But I was so struck by the concept of young kids existing like this, and what you were missing out on in regular life, but what you, like, the relationship that you formed. There was a girl that you never saw again, but like you had such a bond. How do you think those bonds are created in such a traumatic experience?
Well, I think it's based out of necessity, for one. There's a commonality. I mean, when you look at juvenile hall, all of those kids that are in there, 99%, and I'm making the number up, but it's got to be 99, if not 98%, have felt abandoned, have been abandoned. The people that they've relied on their entire life, they turned their backs on them when they needed them most, or there was something missing in terms of a father figure or a mother figure. Mm-hmm. And so what happens is you put all these people with these same backgrounds together, and we all can empathize with each other. Mm-hmm. But at the top of that chain, though, is survival. And so you start looking for, it's like the show Survivor, right? You start looking for alliances. Who can you trust? It's not so much who can you trust 100%, it's like who do you not trust? And you want to get rid of them, and then you kind of start building relationships with those other people. So when I was there, the first time I went to juvie, I was scared. I was, just afraid, and then the stuff happened when that first time I was there. The second time I went, I said, okay, if I'm going to be here, I'm not going to let that happen again. So how do I start putting together my group to protect myself? And I think I was able to find a group of inmates who I could not totally confide in, because it's tough to trust anybody in that situation, but there were relationships that were established, and of course, and it all comes from a common set of facts and background.
Yeah, and then being the youngest of four, your other three brothers, they were obviously struggling being in that family situation as well. Mm-hmm. But their paths were different, right? Were they in and out of juvenile hall? You didn't talk about that so much, but I know that the way your story has played out is so much different than the way your brothers did.
So the older twin brothers, one, Eddie, he did go to juvenile hall, and then he went to prison. It's called Rayford in Florida. And once he kind of figured it out, like, I don't like this, and kind of he straightened it out. Now, he wasn't the smartest guy, but he had a big heart. And I say he wasn't smart. He dropped out of school in like 8th or 9th grade. But he had a big heart, and he was very skilled. He had a great skill set. He could fix stuff. I mean, he was like a handyman. I mean, he could. So that was his education. He was great at it. Yeah. He learned. The other twin, Tommy, who was the root of a lot of my angst growing up, has been in and out of prison his entire life. He's been incarcerated for over 50% of his life. So just back and back and forth. Steve, the one who's closer to me, he actually never got in trouble with the law. Always was like a firefighter or paramedic, police explorer. He liked that, which is kind of ironic, being a police explorer in our family. Yeah. But he parlayed that. He figured out his education in high school and was able to go to the fire academy and paramedic. So he was a firefighter, paramedic. So great, he got out of that, right? And his daughter's a college graduate, so he's on a good path. So. And then of course there's me. So the answer to your question is, one of them never went. One went one time and learned his lesson, and the other one still trying to figure it out.
Yeah. So it's always amazing to me how different our paths can be, even being raised in the same household.
Right.
Right. Mm-hmm. I mean, and the things that we grab onto, and finding a purpose or knowing what we're talented at. Yeah. And letting that grow into something, I always think makes such a difference. But in your story, around the age of 12 is when you found your foster family? Yeah, so I was in and out of juvenile hall and group homes for about 3 years. And then finally I get a call when I was in a group home in Tampa from Sandy Evancho, who's my foster mother. And she said, I'm your new foster mother, dear. And she's from Maine, so she still has the accent. I used to tease her about it. But, and it was sort of different because I'd never been in a foster home. So I was like, okay, this might be different. So I was in juvenile hall, in and out of group homes, so this seemed like a little more permanent. So I thought, all right, let's see what this is about. This might be pretty cool. And it was actually a week before my 12th birthday, June 9th, 1983. Oh, and June 9th. That's my third. That's Kate's birthday. Oh, there you go. See, that's my rebirthday. And so I met Sandy and Joe. Evancho and Joe since passed away. But yeah, since then it was sort of. I decided to listen to what they may have to tell me, and that they wanted to actually help me. And there were some serious struggles, obviously, early on, but eventually we figured it all out, and she's still considered my mother to this day. So yeah, I mean, there were some stories in the book about the stubborn nature and the self-protection really that you were exhibiting when they were trying to set standards and boundaries and make rules, and you had to let go of a lot of that survival instinct to fit in that house, is what it seemed like to me, which when you grow up in a family, right, maybe it's more natural from when you've been there since birth. But to take you from that situation that you were in, how long do you think it took you to start feeling safe, to kind of let go and not so much conform, but right. I think the word is trust, right? Like, when did I actually trust that these two individuals, my foster parents, weren't going to be like the rest of the adults in my life and abandon me at some point? And I think I started to see it initially when she went to bat for me for my middle school classes, because they wanted me to repeat a grade. And she being my foster mom, said, he's not going to repeat 6th grade, and he's not going to be put in remedial classes. The kid's smart enough. He's never been given a chance. We're in his corner. You're going to put him in mainstream classes. And of course, there was some back and forth. My foster mother won that battle, and the rest is kind of history. And I thought, man, they're sticking up for me. That's kind of cool. That hasn't happened before. But in the back of my mind, I was still thinking, okay, there's going to be something where, they're going to abandon me at some point or whatever. But I would say probably a couple of years into it, I kind of was like, okay, this looks like it's going in the right direction. And they were supportive. They weren't shoving stuff down my throat. They weren't telling me, it was really weird because it was more positive reinforcement instead of negative. It wasn't about punishment. It was about, hey, look, if you do this, look what this will lead to. And then
just normalizing my life, which I never had. I'd never traveled before. Like first summer we went up to Maine. I was like, wow, this is cool. I've never flown. So it was kind of just a sense of normalcy, and I was like, okay, I like this. But they did it the right way, and I think I've tried to tell her to write a book and go out and speak to people, because they did do it the right way. Because I was having none of it when I first got there.
Yeah, well, it's understandable when you read the whole story, you know, where you were coming from. But I'm curious with that relationship with them, and what were some of the qualities. Now, did they have any other kids in the house?
They didn't. They weren't supposed to get pregnant. The doctor said you can't have kids, but lo and behold, once my foster mother turned 40, she got pregnant, and I have my brother Joey Uvancho, who's actually the CPA and a tax guy for our sports firm.
Oh, I love it. And he's so how many years younger than
17.
17 years.
Yes.
Wow. When I was in college, my roommate, her mom had a baby, and I remember that very well. And how such a huge age difference, but how cool to have that him become part of your business and your purpose.
Oh, it was great. I was a junior in high school, and I had a picture of him. I'd take him around, and of course, when I was in high school, the high school girls loved it. So
totally. That's how cute he is.
Yeah, I was like, Mom, let me hold Joey for a second.
Totally.
So we joke about it still, but
that's pretty amazing, because I do think I've seen that happen too. It's like for women, like it can be such an angst-filled thing to want a child, and then when you let go of that, you fill that hole, and you let go of that worry, and then it happens. Like it's pretty amazing. It happens with adoptions a lot.
Does it? Yeah, I can imagine. I think they just got tested, and I think they said, okay, you can handle a child.
Yeah.
You're gonna get,
Clearly, yeah, for sure.
You can handle him. You can handle a child.
Yeah.
Right.
So we were talking about, before we started, your high school journey, and you were mentioning, I thought it was all sports based, but you were also involved in theater.
Yeah.
So I can see how your love for sports, your love for theater, how did that parlay its way into the baseball world? So
I've always loved baseball. I think it's one of the greatest games in the world. I just think without a clock, it's one of the few that you don't have a clock. You just sort of, you got to get to 27 outs, and you got to just play into the end. I wasn't very good. I mean, I tried hard, but I'm not going to pretend that I was a good baseball player. So when I was going out for the high school team, we didn't have JV. We only had varsity. And, if you made the varsity team, great. If you didn't, there was no JV. There was no baseball for you. So the sophomore year, a guy got cut freshman year, obviously. Sophomore year, coaches said, hey, you know what? We may have a spot for you because of your speed, and your defense is good. You can't hit, but maybe we'll just bench runner, but you're going to be the last guy on the bench. And I said, oh, okay, that sounds good to me. And then some friends talked me into auditioning for a play, for West Side Story. And I was like, I'll try that. So I auditioned for West Side Story at the same time. And that day I show up, and my name was listed as Arab, like one of the, middle roles or whatever. But then I was the understudy for the lead. And I didn't know what that meant. I was like, what's an understudy? So somebody said, well, if the lead guy gets sick or whatever, you're in. I was like, oh, wow, that's like, I'm like second string, I'll take it, right? So then I was like, okay, I think I'll do the acting thing, because, and I'm glad I did. It just sort of worked out differently. I still do intramural sports, stuff like that when I was in college and stuff, but obviously I knew what my limitations were as an athlete, and I thought drama was cool, and it was cool to kind of pretend to be something I'm not. That's kind of really what was neat about it, and then I just did drama the entire way.
Wow.
All the way through.
What do you think you got from that ability to perform?
Just confidence in speaking to people, I think, is the biggest thing. And, working hard I was very deliberate about, I took it seriously. I mean, I tried to learn the lines within 2 weeks, and then that gave me time to practice all of the staging and practice various deliveries and stuff, whereas sometimes some of my classmates they wouldn't learn their lines until like a couple weeks before the show. But I think you miss out on all the staging and all the direction and all, like, hey, maybe if I deliver it this way, it's different, or this, and so you get to play with that once you know your lines. So what it taught was like compartmentalize, get the lines down, now let's start practicing this and start figuring this out. So I was very serious about it.
Yeah, that's really cool to see the way your brain works. And then I go back to thinking you know, if you had never found that sense of safety with your new family, can you reflect on, I mean, the chaos of your childhood to, like, how does a kid learn? I mean, the difference in the way a kid can learn when they're in a safe environment versus when they're being raised in chaos. I mean, would you have discovered what you were good at without the love and the safety of the home that you found yourself in after 12?
Yeah, I mean, obviously having safety and shelter, I mean, the hierarchy of needs,
Right,
you know.
absolutely.
But once those are covered, then you have time to focus on some of those other things, right? Self-actualization is obviously the highest. I mean, we're going back to I listened in college, I listened in that college class, way in the back, and 1,500 students. But I think once those basic needs are covered, it kind of, there's a different type of pressure that's off of you, right? And so when I was at home, it was kind of like, where am I going to get food? Am I going to get beat up today by my brothers or whatever? Am I, you know, do I have to run away? Am I going to sleep on the streets again for tonight? If so, where am I going to go? I'll go rob a car or a house, or like, what do I do to survive? And it's a different type of stress. And what I use that now is, like, I always tell my own kids, and I talk to kids when I talk to them, I say, listen, if it's not life or death, it really isn't life or death, right? Don't make it life or death if we're talking about, you know, pick a subject, right? So what our kids struggle with. So that was important. Just once those, like you said, safety, security, housing, shelter, that stuff was taken care of, it allows you to kind of focus on some of those other things.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting point, though, that you're making, because there really is a lot of anxiety and worry among kids today. And, you know, sometimes, I mean, obviously we were talking about COVID. These kids have been through a lot, and the world's changed a lot, and there's been a lot of shift that we never saw coming. But when you compare those things to the things you've been through, does the perspective that gives you, and sometimes I worry that we don't give them, that there isn't that perspective. And, you know, kids can't help where they're born, right? We're born into, like, thankfully your boys were born into a loving household. It's not like you can hold them,
right?
They haven't been where you've been. But what are some of the things that shaped that from your childhood that helped shape the way you parent today?
So the main thing was we wanted to give them opportunity, right? We wanted to take away, like, hey, you know, your dad struggled with shelter, with food, with security. You don't have to do that. So in exchange, we have some demands from you that we think are reasonable. We want you to give 100% effort in everything you do, school, athletics. We were never somebody that said, we gotta have the best football player, the best baseball player, the best drama. We didn't care about that. What I cared about, you have to give your best effort. Give your best effort. And sometimes that's different. One day your best effort is gonna be at a high level, and a couple days later, if you're sick or something, your best effort's gonna be lower than that, but it's the best effort on any given day. So that's our big upbringing was. And then never did we say, you guys are so lucky you had this, your dad never had this. My wife would sometimes let them know that, you know, hey, you guys are complaining about this, but, you know, you do know how your dad grew up or whatever it may be. And our kids got it, you know, but it was more, for me, I grew up without a father until I was 12 and I got my foster father. But those formative years from 2 to 12, I wanted to make sure, like, hey, dad's here for you guys. I coached their teams. I was the class mom, right? You know, I was like one of the only dads that did it because, and I specifically chose my career as an agent and earlier on as an attorney and had my own business so that I could do that. So I had flexibility because it was important for me to be there for them and to watch them and to help them grow and to kind of guide them. But it was difficult because you almost want to grab them and push them, but you don't, right?
Yeah.
So, as you know, so that was a challenging part, but letting them stumble, you know, I did let them, you know, I didn't mind when they failed, but we would talk about it, you know.
Yeah, interesting, because I do think that's another big thing that's I think part of parenting for resilience. One of the hardest things as a parent is to watch your kids struggle. Right. But maybe given the perspective that you have, did it feel less when they struggled? You were like, oh, but they're okay because they're, you know. Yeah, and you know, of course, the flip side of that is you got to make sure you don't trivialize their feelings because you remember how you were when I was a teenager, and I remember this girl broke up with me. We were dating for 2 weeks. You know, the end of the world. Right? Oh my God, I'm so upset. My dad was like, "Oh, give me a break." My foster dad, "Oh, give me a break. There's plenty of fish in the sea." And at the time, that was the most important thing to me. Yeah.
And so then I blew up at him, and eventually obviously we smoothed things over. But so I tried to do that, like, I didn't want to trivialize it, but I wanted them to know, like, there's going to be other opportunities. There's going to be, and it's difficult, but parenting is a very difficult task, but it's also a rewarding task, and it's your obligation to do the right thing. So there was some struggles along the way, but nothing that was insurmountable.
Yeah. And where are your boys today?
So one of them, they're both in college. So one's going to University of Nevada, Reno. He's going to start in the fall.
Okay.
And then the other one is up at Washington State. He's going back to go.
Are they interested in things that you're interested in? Are they branching out on their own paths?
Well, in terms of a profession, one of them wants to do nutrition and dietitian. So he's very interested in helping people. He wanted to be a chef initially. He did that for a year right out of the COVID, that first year of COVID, 2020 or whatever. And then he realized, he goes, maybe I can help a greater swath of people, because he goes, I don't like the lunch that they serve to our students, because I think that it's not nutritious enough, and it's leading to obesity, and we have an epidemic. So he's like thinking like globally like that, which is like, all right, that's kind of cool. Yeah. And he found that himself. And then my older one is he's doing sustainability, environmental sciences and stuff, because he wants to figure out ways to kind of, like, how do we figure out some of these issues that were going on. So they both love sports. They both love baseball and all, but I think they kind of see what Dad goes through on a daily basis, pulling my hair out sometimes. But but I think that they blaze their own trails. And if they ever want to get into the industry, I mean, we know everybody. I was like, obviously we can make that happen. I said, go do what you want to do. And if you want to come back here, or maybe there's some type of overlap between environmental and obviously nutrition and dietitian with professional athletes. So I said, just go do what you want to do, and really don't ask us to approve it, because we want you to do what you want to do. But if you're going to pick, you better give it 100% effort, what we've been telling you since Little League days. Yeah. And so that's kind of our thing. So yeah, we're pretty excited about it.
That's really
cool. Fun.
It's a fun age. That's the age of my oldest too. It's really cool to see where they're headed. Right.
And you've seen them grow a little bit every day, right? Like, wow. We were joking the other day, because a guy that I office with, one of my clients, he said his son played football with my boy in high school and stuff. So his son called him the other day and said, Dad, I'm going to somewhere to get some food. Do you want anything? He's like, I can't believe he asked me if I wanted something. He called me. And that night my son did the same thing. I went next day, I go, hey, you're not going to believe this, but check this out. But it's just stuff like that. They're kind of, I was like, I don't want anything from Taco Bell, but thanks for asking. But I mean, the fact that they're picking up cues, and we're not having to shove it down the throat, but they're just learning, which is awesome.
Yeah,
it's exciting.
And it is the simple things, right? I mean, that, because the older we get, and when you start to see them picking up on that, if you can enjoy the simple things, and you have that kindness and thoughtfulness for other people, like so many things fall into place when you're coming from there.
Right.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying this chat as much as I am. For more inspiring conversations, go to BeBetterWithWendyJones.com. One of the things, though, that I was thinking when reading your book was the irony in where you started to end up in law.
Oh yeah.
So take me down on that journey. How did you end up in law school?
Well, so I always wanted to get as they call them, terminal degrees, right? An EDD, a PhD. I guess in this case it was a JD. I just wasn't sure what I wanted to do, because once I got my master's degree from the University of Texas, went to work for the Chiefs and the Padres, and I was like, okay.
And your master's was in?
Sports management.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I started looking around at the people that I was working with at the Padres, and Larry Lucchino at the time was a part owner, and John Moores was the owner, was a majority owner. And Larry was the president of the company, but very successful executive in Major League Baseball. And I looked up to these guys, and they both had their law degrees. They weren't necessarily practicing law, but they had their law degrees. And so I thought, that's what I want to do, because I kind of want to be, at that time I wanted to be an executive in baseball, and kind of go down that road. It switched later on to becoming on the agent side, but that's how I chose the law. And then I thought it was kind of ironic, like you said, that here I am in the law, but
did you ever have any hesitation because of your early background? Did you ever have that feeling like, oh, I don't fit in, or that imposter syndrome that can kick in when, if there's something in our background? Were you ashamed of where you came from, or did you have a hold on that?
Yeah, I was never ashamed of it. I was actually proud of it, and that's what I tell kids when I'm talking. Like, be proud of what you're going through because you're learning so much, and you're so battle tested. Like the things that get some of these kids upset today, it's not going to upset you because you've gone down the rabbit hole deep and you've survived. And I think there's some value in that. But I never, in terms of did I feel like I fit in? Of course, I was an actor. So if I didn't, I would act like I fit in. My foster mother always said, "Fake it till you make it."
Okay.
Right? So I was like, okay. But no, I never felt like inferior. I never felt like I didn't fit in. I was like, hey, I've lived this life that you guys, you're advocating for. So I've been there, and I think that gives more credibility. But I never, ever hesitated. The one thing I had concerns over was whether or not the history would interfere with me being able to be licensed as an attorney or by a players association because of my criminal background as a juvenile delinquent. But that never came in, and rightfully it shouldn't because it's all juvenile stuff. But
right.
But it didn't. I mean, that was a small concern, but I was like pressing forward anyways. I didn't care. I'll figure it out when I get there.
Yeah,
right.
That's always I love that. And
right.
that is such an incredible message for youth today. I mean, that resilience message of be proud of who you are,
right,
and work from there.
Yeah.
Because I always say, like, one, you can never create from desperation, right?
Right.
I truly believe that we have to find our strength in something to pull us up out of our challenges.
Right.
But that's an amazing message because I don't think that that's out there in mass today. I think we talk a lot about what's wrong, and it's like, okay, let's realize what's wrong, and then what are we going to do about it? How do you whether that's one individual, whether that's a team or a society, or like,
right,
what are we going to do once you've identified what's wrong? So I applaud your message on that. It's really cool.
Right. Oh, good.
But so you went from wanting to be an executive in baseball and turning over to the sports agent part. How did that journey work?
So I kind of tease my wife about this a little bit. So she's from Orange County. She's from San Juan Capistrano. Okay. And we were living in San Diego. She spent her whole life in SoCal. And what's not to love about SoCal,
Absolutely,
right?
Yeah.
So when I graduated law school, I had an opportunity to join another major league team that was further up north in the cold and away from her family and all that stuff. And I thought, we just had our second son 3 weeks before the bar, so there wasn't any pressure or anything there, right?
Yeah, that part in your book,
right.
I remember that.
It actually relaxed me. I was like, well, at least I got a built-in excuse. I'm just going to go for it. So, but nevertheless, I decided not to take that job and go because I didn't really necessarily want to move team to team every few years, move the family, uprooted. I mean, that's what I did, right? I was a juvenile delinquent. I was uprooted. I was constantly moving. It was unstable. So I didn't want that. I don't want my kids to go through that. My wife didn't really want to go and live up north in the snow, and I don't blame her. So then I said, well, what if I were to set up and just kind of go and try this agent stuff? And she's like, that's fine, whatever you want to do. And she goes, what about your law firm? I said, well, or what about your law? And I said, well, I'll just use that too, and I'll set up shop, and I'll just be a lawyer and a sports agent. We'll see where it goes. I said, I'm a survivor. I'll figure it out. And she's like, I know you will, so go do it. So she's very supportive of it.
That's really cool. There's two things in there that, like, really what I'm realizing about your mentality is you're way more curious than you are fearful, right? And that I always say that's like two sides of the same coin, right? You're either scared of it or you go, okay, wait, maybe I need to learn a little more. Yeah. And it seems like that's your approach, which is really cool.
Right.
And then having that person that doesn't give you a hard time, that's like, no, I believe in you. And
right.
So how, again, going from your background, and how has that shaped what you believe about relationships and marriage and things like that? Like how, just to, the value system that came from meager beginnings to having the structure that you have around you now. Yeah,
I mean, for me, to find my life partner, it's important to find somebody that I can obviously confide in and trust. And one thing that people don't really recognize unless you've been in this situation is, I told you at the beginning of this episode that when my father died, my mother was ill-equipped to deal with things. So for me, it was important that, like, if something would happen to me and I died early and my kids were 2 or 3 or 4 years old, would the mother be able to take care of stuff? And without a doubt, She would. I mean, she'd
Yeah.
she, so, and it's the silly, it's just one of the other boxes, but really, you find someone who makes you laugh, who you're happy with, and who you want to make better, and who wants to make you better, and it's a team. And sometimes I get in trouble when I say this to my wife. I'm like, we make a good team, like we're a good partnership. And because it sometimes comes across as being too business-like.
Okay.
And I'm like, well, I don't mean in a business sense. I mean, like, we're good. So that's, that's important in that relationship. And that's what we have our guys, clients. It's funny watching kids from high school and college, and then they're getting married and having kids. And I tell all these guys the same thing, I mean, just make each other better. You're going to have ups and downs, and it's just a matter of working through them. You chose to marry each other for a reason. Don't forget that reason. Right, so just kind of work through it, and so it's fun to watch them grow and have their families and stuff too.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes it feel like, it sounds like your business is kind of an extended family for you.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Yes.
And how many baseball players are you representing now?
Right now we're up to 28.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when did KVA Sports start?
So the KVA Sports started in August 1st. Yeah, it's August 1st. I don't know
Okay.
but it was 2016.
Okay.
And my predecessor firm, I co-founded a larger firm with a couple of partners, and we grew that up to about 140 clients for various reasons. I just felt that it was time for me to move on. So then pulled the clients out, went and did our own thing.
Was that one all baseball as well?
That was all baseball as well.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you KVA, and then at some point you branched out into beach volleyball.
Yeah, so Richard Hiskey was introduced to me by a mutual friend of ours probably a couple of years ago. We started talking, and I was like, well, I mean, I don't know if I want to branch out there yet. I don't know if I can trust this guy because I don't know him. But so we started talking and meeting, going, and we felt like we had a lot of the same values, a lot of the same kind of philosophies in representing our clients and what we wanted to do for them.
Mm-hmm.
Because on the way up here today, we were talking. I said, Richard, all we do is think of ways to make our clients money. And then we find ways to enforce the rights on those contracts that's making the money. I said, pretty much all we do. He goes, yeah, you know what, you're right. That's all we do. And I said, but that's fine because we want to maximize the value, make their life easier, have them, and that's what we choose to do. And in order to do that, we get to pick the clients that we want to work with. That's, we're in a good position to do that. But going back to with the beach volleyball thing, once the NCAA ruled on the name, image, and likeness stuff last summer, that was kind of our go-ahead. We had already started talking and lining things up in earlier part of the year, but once that switch flipped, it made sense. And we did volleyball because Rich's been involved with it for 40 years or something like that.
Yeah.
Something long.
It's such
time.
a grassroots sport.
It is.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you're getting to know that community.
Yes.
So he's brought you in. What do you think? I mean, different. It's so different, but
Yeah.
I think it's so cool to have people like you. Like what you guys are doing is amazing because you don't make a living as a beach volleyball player for the most part.
Right.
It's very difficult.
Right.
Right. So what the opportunities that you're helping your athletes discover allows them to do what they love.
Yeah. I mean, I love it. I love the sport. I love the clients we have. They're so well educated. They're like athletic. They're outgoing. We talk about character and commitment when we represent our clients, and that's if they have that, then we want to talk with them, and they do that. I mean, if you look at it, it's kind of like this horizontal diversification where they're good at everything. It blows me away. I'm like, wow, she's educated. She's a good athlete. She's a good community. She follows up. She's got a good belief system. Great family. And those are the people you want to rally around, right? Those are the people it's easier to work with. So for us, the challenge is, like you said, it's the volleyball scene has always been post a couple pictures of this, we'll give you some free product or something. Mm-hmm. And so, you can't survive off, Richard likes to say, you can't survive off a lifetime supply of coconut water, right? You need to be able to make money.
Yeah.
And so what we do is we try to find ways to supplement, obviously, they don't win a lot of money in these pools, but
right.
We did notice that with the AVP being purchased by Bally's,
okay.
Fox Sports Regional Network being purchased by Bally's,
mm-hmm.
and their desire to gamify the sport,
okay.
televise it more, we thought, okay, we might be on the beginning of something, a groundswell that's going to explode. And so we do think in a number of years you're going to see higher purses, you're going to see bigger sponsorship deals. And we wanted to be on the forefront of that, you know.
Yeah.
So,
what do you think are some of the challenges? Why do you think beach volleyball is so different than other sports? You know, I mean.
Well, we could do a whole podcast on this, but I can tell you one of the biggest things is that we have to educate the sponsors on how to do sponsorships in this space. A lot of them are like, well, it's all about the Olympics. It's the most watched sport of the Olympic sports and all that stuff. And so it's like, but what you have to tell them is like, listen, NCAA beach volleyball is the fastest growing NCAA sport. And again, Bally's purchasing the AVP, Bally's purchasing Fox Regional Sports to kind of, and then gamifying it where you can actually, do the apps or whatever to make money or play or gamble, whatever you want to call it. They're gamifying it. And I think all of that's creating a groundswell. But I think just trying to educate people to think not just winning a tournament, but getting those personalities. And when you meet these individuals, you go, what a great personality. Like I can have Haley Harward or Julia Scholes or Tina Gardiner or Lexi Denneberg or Corinne Quiggle. I can confidently have them go to a corporate function and give a speech for a lunch or something and talk about competitiveness and drive and all those are all translatable whether you're in business or athlete or whatever. And I have confidence that these athletes can go in there and deliver a speech or whatever. And so I think it's just, how do we find opportunities for them? How can we get creative, think outside the box, and really kind of retrain the industry to, here's what we're looking to do.
Yeah, and I think that's so much I've been zeroing in on with Be Better is that they have such amazing life stories to tell. Even the young ones already just coming out of college. I mean, much like yourself, we learn through these stories and where are the places that we can get them out there. And I've had some of them on my podcast just to get the stories out there. But and then maybe that creates that path to products that not only they can use, but young athletes can use. And then the young athletes are looking up to these athletes of character. And so when we bring that full circle, there's such a beautiful synergy there of how we can help junior athletes who are coming up and maybe they want to be collegiate players, and then maybe those collegiate players want to learn how to make it into the professional ranks. And there's a path there. And I don't think it's been that clear in the past, but I feel like we're starting to see it, and it's really exciting. You're
starting to see these athletes come out of college and beat professionals that have been doing this for 10 or 15 years. And there's almost, it's not a changing of the guard yet, but you're starting to see these girls are coming out, and the guys aren't there because they don't have the NCAA beach volleyball. But you've seen it on the women's side where they're coming out and they're winning tournaments and they're placing, they're going deep, they're going to championship Sundays and stuff like that, and that's a big deal. And so I just think that the sport, I love the sport, but Richard's the guy that really runs this division for us. He kind of say, go here. I'm like, okay, let's do it. Whatever. But I think you hit something else on the head that I didn't touch on myself, and that's the fact that a lot of these younger athletes that look up to these girls that we have, right? And so sports, as you know, is a process, and you put in your time. There's a process that you develop, and again, that process is translatable to whatever profession you're doing. You want to be a doctor or a vet or a nurse or a banker, it doesn't matter.
Look at the Fortune 500 companies that recruit, athletes and female athletes.
Yes, yeah.
Because of the things that they've learned. In fact, the two I always say the two people that are helping me build this, they're both athletes. Because there's something about an athlete where they know how to, even if they don't know, they know how to figure it out. Right. Yeah. And it's powerful.
They know that you have to continue to work, right? Because the dictionary is the only place you find success before work or whatever. So one of those stupid little things I saw when I was in middle school lunch. I was like, what does that mean?
I'm thinking about it.
Like, they're right. But yeah, you're right. So they look at that as a process, how to work. And I think for those young athletes, these girls that are 12, 13, 10, whatever, looking up to these like Lexi Denneberg or Julia Scholes, whatever, they're like, I want to be like her. Okay, well, here's what they do every day in, day out. And here's how they focus on academics and on their community, and they have their faith-based stuff, and they have, their sports. And that, if you want to be like them, that's what you got to do. Start now. And they do, you're right. Yes. And I just think that's kind of cool, because you talk about how do we help try to transition us out of this morass of violence and, whatever else is going on in the world. I think We just got to try to shift what we're focusing on.
Yeah,
Right?
I love that sentiment. And I do think that sports is one of the places that people can come together, and it gives us that, the push to be able to do that, right? I mean, whether it's a baseball game or a beach volleyball tournament or the NBA, I mean, I've always loved sports. I've always loved the resilience stories that come from sports when we get hurt, how we battle back, and we need that right now.
Yeah.
I mean, compared to watching the news, like, I don't watch the news.
Yeah.
My TV only goes on when there's a sporting event on, or maybe for Shark Week with Kate. But
Right, Shark Week, yeah. That was a rough one this week.
I know. But yeah, I've always believed so much in the power of sports to just give us that hope, and I see that we need that out there so much.
That's
right
right.
now. But something that we didn't touch on that I'm kind of circling back to in your story, that when we always learn things through facing challenges in our life, and I think when we come through those things, there are things that we need to grab onto and use to help us go forward. And then there's also the letting go of whether it's learning to forgive. And what are some of the principles that kind of helped you keep those relationships in your past that were difficult for you, like with your brothers or your mom? That sense of how do you keep that relationship on as something that you want to hold on to even when you've been through something so difficult?
Right. So I think there's a couple things. So for my mother's situation, my natural mother, again, I felt bad for her because she was overwhelmed. She didn't know how to deal with it. She didn't focus on developing the proper tools. She didn't educate herself after high school. She was a sweet lady, but she just was overwhelmed. And so I give some deference to that and forgiveness. Obviously, I don't hold her and blame her for anything, right? Could she have done things differently and been a better mom? Sure, I'm sure she knows that. So it doesn't do me any good to tell her that. But she did. She was involved with my life even once I went into foster care. My foster parents were very close to her and kind of helped her out, and which was kind of cool too. It was nice for them to kind of help her out because she was living in Section 8 housing still and everything. So, but they reached out to her as often as they could, and we did things together. So, but I wasn't gonna. There was no sense in having a grudge against her. As far as my brothers go, it was the situation they were in. It wasn't they didn't know any better. I've reached out to try to help them or whatever, and one of my brothers I don't even really talk to anymore because it was one of those things where, and that's an important part of it. I think these kids in juvenile hall, they're like, oh, my family is so important. I don't want to let them go. I don't want to let them, but we don't get to choose our family, right? We get to choose our friends. We get to choose our spouses, our significant others. We don't get to choose our family. And so they get so locked in, like, well, I can't let my brother go. But your brother almost tried to kill you, or your brother, violated you in some other way. I mean, so, or you're trying to help him for 5 years and he doesn't want to take the help. He wants to continue to revert back. Eventually you have to go, you know what? You're my family, and you always have a spot for me, but I've got to carve the rotten wood. I can't carve rotten wood, right?
Yeah.
I can't carve rotten wood, so I'm going to move on. I'm over here whenever you want to reach out. You reach out to me. But understand, when you reach out to me, I'm going to try to pull you out and help you out, but otherwise I'm not going to be banging my head against the desk every day. And I did that with my older brother Tommy. It was hard, but it was one of those things where I was just like, you don't want to change. You want to continue to revert back, and then I can't help you because I've got all these people over here that want help. I'm going to go help them. Yeah. And it's hard because a lot of times you're like, oh, it's my family. I can't do that. That's why we always tell people, like Richard would say, he would say, oh, let's welcome to the family. I go, well, this isn't a family. We treat people better than family, right? I mean, because you think about it, you don't, as a lawyer, side note here, right? I deal with a lot of businesses. I do most of business law. And I get people come in and go, hey, I really want to treat this business like a family. And I said, okay, how many dysfunctional families do you know, right? And there's always something, right? Aunt, uncle, brother, whatever it is. I said, so do you really want to treat it like a family, or you want to run it like a business? Because there's a big difference. You can meet their needs and all that stuff by doing it in a professional manner. But so going back, I do forgive, but I don't forget, right? I mean, but I am very forgiving of, even business dealings. My wife would be like, how could you not be that upset with it? I'm like, well, it doesn't do me any good. It's negative energy. I'm just going to focus on doing what I do, and, and
that's when I tell my kids a lot is like, focus on yourself. Like,
right.
You focus on the only thing you can change is you.
Yeah.
Right? And we lose so much energy when we're trying to push something on somebody else.
Right.
And I feel like the younger you can learn that, the easier.
Right.
The faster you can move forward, really.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So you don't get stuck in reverse, right? But I think it's okay to get upset and get mad and be like,
Yeah.
oh, this guy did me wrong. And, you'd be upset about it, but you're like, you can address that. There's, as a lawyer, there's ways you can address that, or or as a person, there's ways to address it, and then you just move on.
Yeah, and something that's coming through for me there is like there's a really big difference in maybe being a supportive family member and being a leader, right? Like when we come into a business and being able to lead that business, especially as an entrepreneur or your own, owning your own shop.
Right.
There's a sense of real leadership that has to come through, because a lot of times you're out there on your own, right? Until you build that.
Yeah.
And oftentimes in families we play certain roles, but choosing to be that leader in
right.
business. What are some of the things you think are most important when you're starting out, like to create your own business?
Well, you can't have any fear, right? You can't be afraid to fail. We spend so much time preparing, like, well, what if I fail? I've got plan B, plan C, and plan D. You should plan for success, right? So I'm going to be successful, and I'm going to know how to deal with that success. And I remember going, when I was first starting the baseball business, and I was like, I asked myself this question kind of out loud, or in the living room or whatever it was, my wife heard me, and I said, what am I going to do once I do get a guy to the big leagues? Am I going to know how to act? Am I going to know what to do? And I thought, yeah, I do. And then I figured it out. I was like, once they get there, I'm going to have questions about A, B, C, and D. I'm going to go ahead and research A, B, C, and D now. Yeah. So when I'm ready for it. So prepare for success. Get ready to be successful, and don't worry about failure. You just kind of keep pressing forward. That's one thing. And then understand that you are going to have some failures. Yeah. You just learn from them. I don't know if I put this in my book or not, but the very first time when I decided to become my own attorney, my own shingle, I was on a plane flying back from San Francisco, and this girl comes and sits next to me on the plane, and we start talking, and she was in bank, and she's like, what do you do? I said, oh, I'm a lawyer. She goes, oh, what kind of law do you do? I said, I do all kinds of stuff. I was like, why, do you need a lawyer? She goes, yeah, I'm getting a divorce, and I need a family law attorney. Do you do family law? And I'm like, yeah, I could do family law. I never knew what family law was right at the time. But my mindset was like, I'll learn what I need to learn and help this woman out. So she said, okay, can I come and see you in your office tomorrow? This was a Sunday. I said, I'll tell you what, I'm busy on Monday. How about Tuesday at 1 o'clock or whatever it was? Okay. She said, okay, I'll see you Tuesday at 1. I spent all day Monday studying. How do you file a lawsuit? How do you, all this stuff about how do you do family law? And I researched it for 8 or 10 hours. She came in the next day. I said, here's what we got to do. And that was my foray into family law, and it was my first client, because I knew this was an opportunity. Now, I wasn't going to take it and do it wrong. Yeah. Now the pressure's on me. I was like, if I'm going to represent you, or I'm going to do it right, and it's going to be done right. And so that was another thing that I've taken with me over the time. Like, you don't do things halfway, right? You do it. And so I spent all day Monday learning it, and confident enough, and then we talked about it. She was one of my first clients, and then she had some business law matters after that, and so it worked out. But it was one of those things where I wasn't afraid of failure, but I was like, I'm going to have to do a lot of work to make sure I don't fail. And that's how that came about. So I don't think you have to be, you don't want to be afraid, and you just want to continue to press forward and just realize you got to work hard.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You got to love what you do, right? There's got to be a purpose behind it.
There is that too,
right?
Yes.
And that's what I absolutely love about your story, is that you really have taken like the most resilient things that you can learn from your story that's so incredibly difficult. And I really recommend your book to everybody, because it reads like a story. So it's gripping. But the way that you've created a path for yourself and your family through such difficult circumstances really is a message that needs to be out there right now. And tell me some of the things you do to get your message out there, because I know you talk to youth. How do you find those opportunities? How can people get to you to have you do that for them?
So we talk in schools, local schools. We talk through a group called CASA, Court Appointed Special Advocates.
My mom was a CASA board member in Fresno.
In Fresno, there you go.
Yeah.
So we've talked to a couple of CASA groups, in Texas and California, wherever.
Tell people what CASA does.
So it's court-appointed special advocates, and what they do is they align mentors, adult mentors, to work with these juveniles who are caught in the system. Mm-hmm. And it's basically you're advocating for your child. You don't have to know about the law. You get trained. They train you how to do that. All you have to do is you have to have passion to want to help kids, and you got to have time, and you've got to be committed. And it's not a lot of times. It's like once or twice a month maybe. But if you tell a child, I will be there at this certain date and time, it's so critical that you have to do that, because they're so used to being abandoned, and that's what it really comes down to. That's why a lot of these kids act up. So that's what the purpose is. And so you meet with them and you mentor them and you say, hey, how are your grades going? What can we do differently to help? What can I help you out with? Let's go to dinner next Friday and talk. And it's such a blessing for these kids, and they really thrive off it. And they've got, if you go to CASA.org, I believe it's CASA. I think it's CASA Gal now, because they pair.
We'll
but
get
it's a great,
right in the show notes.
But it's a great organization, and they're all over the country. And if you really want to help out these children, that's the way to get involved. Okay. So we've done some stuff through there. I've talked to the groups. I speak to a lot of obviously students, but I also speak to a lot of parents and a lot of CASA groups, a lot of people that work with these kids, because they need to know, it can be discouraging when you see the same thing over and over, and you just keep trying and trying. These people have big hearts, but you got to know there's the light at the end of the tunnel, and what you are doing is making an impact on these kids. You might not know it right away, and they sure as heck aren't going to tell you, right, because they're too proud, right? But you are making an impact, and so we'll talk to those groups. There's a website, behindinthecount.com, where people reach out to us all the time, and whatever we can do to help, we want to do. I want to spread the message.
I love it, and I thank you so much for being here. I'm such a believer in conscious capitalism these days, because I'm a proud American, and I love when people align their passions. And yes, there's the nonprofit arms of everything that you're doing, but also just like aligning your passions and being that example for the next generation, and doing something that allows you to make a living for your family, and just make the place that we know this country can be. And it's so much different, I feel, than what we're hearing on the news. I think there's so much growth mindset and conscious capitalism going on that we're not hearing about. So Thank you for being part of that.
No problem.
And we'll make sure that all of those places that people can find you are in the show notes. And I just thank you for telling your story and being here today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening to What I Meant to Say. If you enjoyed this conversation, you know what to do. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen. And for more great stories and content, go to BeBetterWithWendyJones.com.